Conspiracies. The science fiction writers like to project religion into the future and imagine how it would change over the years. So, for example, in Star Trek, there's no religion, at least not really in the Federation. There are the Klingons and the Bajorans and so forth. Heinlein predicted the United States going through another theocracy. Well, I guess it would be our first theocracy. And it does look like it might be coming. Now, Star Wars was always hit or miss on religion, with the Jedi being the only real religion they showed on screen. And I did just talk about Tron. I love the religion in Tron. And the reason we are always projecting religion in the future is because it has been such a big part of history that we couldn't do our jobs properly without it. We couldn't do our jobs properly without considering the impact that religion would have on the future. But today there's a new kind of religion that coexists with all the other major ideologies out there. And that religion, conspiracy cult. And it has grown to the point where we've even had a US president who was a practitioner of this religion. One of the reasons conspiracies continue, besides our inherent paranoia as a species and our ability to believe in the dumbest things imaginable, is because sometimes the conspiracy theorists are right. I say this a lot, and I'm going to say it again here. Even a stopped clock is right twice a day. So I have to admit, I feel like an accomplished science fiction writer because I have already addressed conspiracies in a story and have a whole series planned around it. But I haven't even written the first book. Instead, I pulled a Tolkien on all of you. I wrote a book that's part of the continuity, and it sort of approaches the basic story, but isn't about any of it. So this is my version of The Hobbit, and it's called The Fool's Tale. Before we go any further, make sure to click like and subscribe. That way you'll get to see more content like this. Also, to help other people find this content. You can also join my Patreon. There'll be links down below. And a reminder at the end of the video. For now, enjoy the rest of the video. Now, I wrote this book all the way back in 2011. I wrote this book all the way back in 2011. But I didn't finish it and publish it until like 2017. So that's 6 years. I hope my next book doesn't take that long, but we're going on 5 years already, so it's not looking good. It was my novel for National Novel Writing Month, which takes place in November. And while I did finish the 50,000 word count in November and won, I didn't actually, it wasn't story complete until December. I can't actually tell you what the book is about, because if I tell you, there are spoilers. But the introduction to this video should give you an idea of why. Yes, there's a conspiracy involved, and that's only a mild spoiler. Alright, so let's talk about the setting. The Fool's Tale takes place mostly on Europa, which is a moon around Jupiter. I've imagined it as a trade hub, because it has such a high orbit that it takes, of all the moons around Jupiter, it takes the least amount of energy to get to from deep space and the least amount of energy to leave. At the same time, it's a water world, so there's plenty of water to make things like oxygen and rocket fuel and grow crops and whatever. So I think we could settle Europa pretty easily compared to the other moons around Jupiter anyway. And then I just built up a science fiction analog of Austin, Texas, and I didn't even try to hide it. They're in a city called New Austin. Otherwise, the Jupiter system has the Islamic Republic of Jupiter, with the mainland being on the planet itself. I imagine that Jupiter would be settled in cloud cities, meaning cities that sit in the clouds. So they'd be like balloons, just using buoyancy to stay up. And when I pictured that in my head, my brain just decided to overlay a sandstorm on top of this, and so I thought, why not put Muslims on Jupiter? So that's what I did. But then I needed a way to have a white protagonist with his Hispanic fiancée in this environment, and that's how Europa became a very diverse multicultural trade hub, more akin to Constantinople, which is now Istanbul. I don't know why, it's not my business. Now, I have to confess, if I were writing this book today, I would do a lot more to highlight the diversity of New Austin in this environment. But because this was my first book, at some point it became more important to just finish the book than it, because if you try too hard to make it perfect, okay, let me ask you this. How many writers do you know haven't finished their first book? And how many times have they rewritten it? Started over, started to rework the plot, whatever. Now, at some point you have to say, this is it, this is the story. I'm going to finish from here. And you're going to revise it until it's done. So don't be surprised when in later Space Pirate Chronicles books, New Austin looks and feels a lot different than it does here, because I'm going to correct those errors. All right, so let's talk about characters. It is an ensemble story, and it's told from a first-person perspective. So let's start with the narrator, Cecil Winberry. Now, Cecil is a busker. If you're not in the know about what buskers are, that's the correct term for what you call a street performer. He juggles, mostly, but he does do a bit of a clown routine. I figured in a democracy, if you have a jester who used to perform for kings, royalty, the ruling class, in a democracy, that person would perform in the street for the people. So that's what Cecil does. He's silly, he's a bit cynical, but he's overall a hopeful and positive person. And his name is what it is because I decided to try to come up with the widest name I could think of, and that's what I came up with. So then we have Sherry. Now, Sherry is Cecil's friend, and she makes it into the story because she works for a private investigator, and her specialization is finding people that don't want to be found or finding people that are difficult to be found. And so she provides resources that Cecil doesn't have. Then there's Larry. Larry is also Cecil's friend. They used to work together at the community college, and then something happened and Cecil doesn't work there anymore, but Larry still does, and the two keep in touch. Now, Larry's a net runner, which is a word I came across. Okay, I ripped it straight from a tabletop RPG that I think was called Cyberpunk. But in my world, there's no neural interface. So Larry is actually working as a physics lab technician because he's retired and just goofing off. Then there's Mary. And I did not intend all these names to rhyme. It just happened. I suck at naming things. Now, Mary is Cecil's fiance, and most of what she does happens off screen. There's a reason for it. I can't go into it here. Then I have Captain Nick Naptime Vallejo. Now, I named him after a local band here in Austin. That's named after the two brothers that founded the band, like Van Halen, Vallejo. I don't really know the correct way to pronounce this. This is just how they say it on the radio, Vallejo, so that's how I've been saying it.
Just another day.
He is a Mexican pirate captain. His pirate crew is diverse, primarily because I wanted to out Star Trek. Now, Star Trek gets a lot of points for being diverse while still featuring almost all white people, which I've always found a little weird. So the only white person on Nick's ship also has a very racist nickname, and because he's a cook and he practices Asian martial arts. And his name is Chino. And Chino gets a mention here just because I wanted to mention him. He is the wise martial arts guy who mostly just cooks for everybody. He's kind of a spiritual leader. He's also the ship's tactician and PE teacher, and he trains the crew physically for whatever they're going to do. Now, there are a lot more characters, but these are the major ones, except Chino. He's not a major character, but he does have a great scene. All right, so here's the story. What I can tell you. If I tell you more, I would have to kill you. So the story gets started when Cecil is downtown busking, and some random guy shows up and drops a data drive into Cecil's little money bag. Now, this isn't a big deal. This kind of thing happens all the time. Phone numbers, whatever. But when Cecil tries to read it, it comes up empty. Also, the random guy gets murdered right after that. So Cecil figures that whatever is on the drive must be important, so he should try to return it to its rightful owner. The problem is that he can't determine who the owner is, and because someone got killed over the drive and people are starting to give him trouble about it too, he decides he needs some help and protection and that sort of thing. So he ropes in Sherry, whose specialization is finding people who are missing and hooking them up with their families, figure out who the guy was, and therefore who the drive should go to. Then he ropes in Larry to figure out how to read it. Now, the first two acts are basically all of that. Then they figure out what's on the drive, where it's supposed to go. They pile into the pirate ship, and they go off and have a big space battle. So your reward for putting up with all this caginess is a big space battle. Now, the story isn't told in chronological order. It is technically a 3-act story. The first 2 acts are told at the same time. I even got pretentious and I used negative chapters. So chapter -1, chapter -5, whatever. Chapter -7 happens before chapter -5, which happens before chapter 0, etc. And so the first 2 acts are told at the same time. As soon, they both resolve, like one right after another. And then the 3rd act starts. And that one is linear. Now, I'm pretty sure I did all this craziness to conceal the fact that the plot is pretty simple overall. And it might be boring if you read it in sequential order. Actually, I did this because I wanted to start telling the story in the middle, but I didn't want to use flashbacks to tell the first part of the story, and I didn't take the time to think about how I really wanted to, and then I just gave up and ended up with this. Now, I think it worked, but I did have to do a round of revisions where I printed all the chapters and I put them in chronological order to make sure it made sense. And boy, was that boring. Anyway, I do think this book is worth reading.
That's the spirit!
I enjoy writing it, and I enjoy reading it whenever I do. And everyone who has read it has come back and told me they really enjoyed it. So you will probably enjoy it too. You will not waste your time reading this book. Now, I never intended it to be great literature, so if you go into it thinking that's what it's supposed to be, you're going to be really disappointed.
Just another day.
But if you go into it thinking that it's just a fun ride, you might be pleasantly surprised. So let's talk about the series, The Space Pirate Chronicles. Now, The Fool's Tale isn't really part of the main series continuity. And this is important because people keep asking me for a sequel, and I'm not going to write one. The main series is an alien invasion story. That's not a spoiler, I promise. I've gotten tired of this alien invasion trope where we're just sitting here minding our own business on Earth, and the aliens show up in orbit and basically nearly wipe us out. I wanted to tell a story about an actual war, and I wanted to imagine the aliens invading after we have settled throughout the solar system, where we'll have bases all the way out in the Kuiper Belt on various trans-Neptunian objects, and we'll have space stations and all that kind of stuff. An interplanetary civilization where mankind is technologically advanced but still hasn't figured out faster than light travel. So imagine if it was like Russia versus Ukraine, but it was in space and the solar system is Ukraine. Except that I came up with this concept years before Russia invaded Ukraine. So anyway, then an alien that does have faster than light travel shows up and invades our solar system. But then I didn't want to tell another military science fiction story. I wanted to talk about space pirates. So the main body of the story is going to focus on Captain Vallejo and the crew of the Sweet Dreams and, what they're doing during the war. So the entire story, as I have it mapped out, is 10 books. I do have a 7-book outline for it in the event that I end up not writing all 10 books. But do you have any idea how hard it is just to write one book, let alone 10, while working full time? So go buy this book, join my Patreon. That's the only way the series is going to get written. Now, where I'm at in the series so far, besides this book, is I've gotten snippets of other books written. I've broken ground on the first book of the series. I haven't gotten real far in it yet. The next 2 or 3 books I'm going to be publishing aren't even in the series as currently planned. I've got Ghost in Time, which is my rehab book. I've got Fast Burger. So I guess it depends on how many people join my Patreon. So go read The Fool's Tale. Link is in the description. And while you're at it, go ahead and check out Detective Lindsay, another series that I'm working on. It's not science fiction. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye, guys.